My 7-year-old son Leo was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by his favorite building blocks. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, and everything felt peaceful. He was humming a little tune, lost in his world of imagination. Then it happened. Leo reached into the large wooden toy box and suddenly froze mid-play. His hands stopped moving and his laughter died instantly. He didn't scream or cry. He just stared into the box with eyes wide and full of confusion. My heart skipped a beat because I had never seen him look that way. I walked over and knelt beside him, wondering what could possibly have scared him. When I looked inside the toy box, my stomach dropped through the floor. Tucked between a plush dinosaur and a plastic fire truck was a small, heavy black object wrapped in dark tape. It looked industrial and dangerous, something that didn't belong in a child's playroom. This wasn't an accident or a misplaced tool. This was placed here on purpose, hidden where a curious boy would eventually find it. As I reached out to touch it, my hands were shaking violently. Before I could even process the fear, I heard a familiar, chilly voice. I turned around to see my mother-in-law, Beatrice, standing in the doorway with a strange, knowing smile. "Oh," she said casually. "He finally found it." I didn't move. I just stared at the object in the box, then back at Beatrice. "I know every single toy in this house. I am the one who buys them, organizes them, and cleans them up every night. This box contains something I never bought, something I never approved of, and something I would never allow near my child." It looked like a high-voltage industrial battery or some kind of heavy electronic component with exposed wires. My mind was racing, trying to understand why anyone would put a potentially hazardous item in a 7-year-old's play space. It felt like a sick joke, but the weight of the situation was very real. My hands continued to shake as I realized someone wanted him to find it. They had waited for this exact moment. Just then my husband Marcus walked into the room, looking at us with a confused expression. I pointed at the box, my voice caught in my throat. I managed to ask what that thing was doing in Leo's room. Marcus didn't look shocked or worried at all. He just sighed and shook his head as if I were being difficult. "You're overreacting," Marcus said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Mom was just helping out with his education. It's a learning tool." Beatrice walked further into the room, smoothing her skirt with a calm, practiced motion. She looked at me with a pitying expression, the kind she usually reserved for people she thought were beneath her. She started calling me dramatic and high-strung, her voice soft and sweet like honey covering a blade. While I was standing there with my heart racing, my husband was nodding along to her every word. Marcus backed her up, telling me that I always made a big deal out of nothing and that I should trust his mother more. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was the only one reacting to a dangerous object in a toy box because I was the only one truly protecting our son. I looked at Leo, who was still quiet and pale, and I knew I had to be his shield. I demanded to know why she would ever put something like that in his toys. Beatrice didn't even blink. She tilted her head and casually admitted that she had added the item herself while I was at work the previous day. She said it was time for Leo to learn about real-world mechanics and that I was coddling him too much. As she spoke, a flood of memories rushed into my mind. I suddenly remembered all the other helpful moments I had ignored over the last few years. There were the meals I didn't approve of, like the time she gave Leo sugary snacks right before bed when I specifically asked her not to. There were the house rules she quietly broke, like letting him watch movies I had deemed too violent for his age. Every time I complained, Marcus told me I was being too strict. Beatrice always had a way of making her interference look like a gift. These weren't just small favors. They were decisions made without me, designed to undermine my authority as a mother. This wasn't the first line she had crossed in our home. It was just the boldest and most dangerous move she had made yet. I looked at her and realized she didn't respect me at all. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as a new thought took hold. If she put this in the living room, what else had she done? I stood up and walked toward the hallway. I had to check my son's room. I realized this isn't the only thing that doesn't belong. I pushed open the door to Leo's bedroom, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I went straight to his dresser and started pulling open drawers. Beatrice followed me, her footsteps clicking on the hardwood floor, while Marcus trailed behind, complaining that I was being insane. I ignored them both. I reached the bottom drawer where we kept his extra blankets and pajamas. Tucked deep in the back, hidden under a folded quilt, I found a small, leather-bound book and a heavy metal lockbox. My chest tightened so much it was hard to breathe. I pulled them out and threw them onto the bed. This isn't carelessness. This is a calculated effort to have a secret life with my son. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to be as outraged as I was. Instead, he looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. His silence was the loudest thing in the room. I realized then that he wasn't just being passive. He was a participant in this. I gripped the edge of the bed, my knuckles turning white. I asked him how long he had known about these hidden items. My husband finally looked up, his face pale, and admitted he knew all along, and he didn't stop her. Marcus stood there, looking like a little boy caught in a lie. He started explaining his reasoning, but it just made me feel sick to my stomach. He told me it was easier to let his mother do what she wanted than to start an argument. He said she was lonely and that giving her these special projects with Leo kept her happy and out of our hair. In that moment, the reality hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I realized I've been parenting alone this entire time. My partner, the man who was supposed to stand by me, had been letting his mother treat our home like her own personal playground. He had traded our son's safety and my boundaries for a bit of quiet. I looked at the two of them, Beatrice with her smug smile and Marcus with his weak excuses, and I knew shouting wouldn't change anything. They had already decided that my voice didn't matter. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The time for crying and begging for respect was over. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a fight. I decided right then not to argue anymore. I reached for my phone. I started documenting everything. I started by taking clear, high-resolution photos of the object in the toy box. I captured the wires, the sharp edges, and the lack of any safety labels. Then I moved to the bedroom and photographed the lockbox and the leather book. Beatrice tried to snatch the phone out of my hand, but I stepped back, my eyes warning her not to touch me. I didn't say a word. I just kept clicking. I went through my old text messages, finding every time she had sent a helpful suggestion that was actually a demand. I saved the messages where she told me I was a nervous mother, and that I needed to loosen up or I would ruin Leo. When I looked at them all together, they read more like commands from a general than advice from a grandmother. I felt like a detective at a crime scene, piecing together the evidence of my own erasure. Marcus watched me from the doorway, looking nervous now. He asked what I was doing, but I just kept working. While I was scrolling through a shared cloud drive for family photos, I found a folder I didn't recognize. I opened it and uncovered a group chat I was never meant to see. The group chat was titled The Family Circle, and it included Beatrice, Marcus, and Marcus's sister. I started scrolling through the messages, and my heart began to pound against my ribs. In the chat, my mother-in-law mocked my parenting style daily. She called me the warden, and laughed about how I was too sensitive to handle real life. What hurt the most was seeing Marcus's name in the thread. He didn't defend me. Most of the time he stayed silent while they ripped me apart, but occasionally he would agree. He would send emojis laughing at her jokes about my neurotic rules. They had planned things behind my back for months. Weekend trips, secret gifts, and even potential schools they wanted Leo to attend without asking me. It was a total betrayal of the life we had built together. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. I scrolled further back, my thumb shaking on the screen. I was looking for the origin of the toy box incident. That's when I saw a long message from Beatrice from 3 days ago. One message specifically referenced the box and a plan for the upcoming weekend. I read the message 3 times just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Beatrice had written that she was tired of Leo being soft, and that he needed to learn how to handle dangerous things, so he wouldn't turn out like his weak mother. She said she was going to hide a specialized battery testing kit in his toys to see if he was smart enough to handle it or if he would run crying like a baby. The message revealed she wanted to teach him early and toughen him up by exposing him to risks without my knowledge. My blood ran cold as I realized she was intentionally putting our son in harm's way just to prove a point about my parenting. This wasn't just a difference in opinion about snacks or bedtime. This was a calculated psychological and physical experiment on a 7-year-old child. Marcus had seen this message. He had read it and replied with, "Okay, Mom, just be careful." He hadn't stopped her. He had let his own mother use our son as a pawn in her sick game of control. I realized this goes beyond family drama. It's a direct threat to my son's safety. I didn't wait another second. I walked to Leo's closet and pulled out his small rolling suitcase. I started throwing his clothes and favorite toys inside. Marcus followed me, his voice rising in panic. He asked what I was doing and where I was going. I didn't look at him. I told Leo to put on his shoes because we were going on a special sleepover at a hotel. My son looked confused, but he could see the look on my face and knew not to argue. I was determined to remove my son from the house that night. There was no yelling, no screaming, and no big scene for the neighbors to hear. I was moving with a cold, sharp precision. Beatrice stood at the top of the stairs, shouting that I was being ridiculous and that I would regret this. I walked past her as if she were made of glass. I put the suitcase in the car, buckled Leo into his seat, and locked the doors. As I backed out of the driveway, My phone began to blow up with notifications. My mother-in-law was calling me hysterical, leaving voicemails saying I was stealing her grandson. I didn't answer a single one of them. We checked into a quiet hotel 10 miles away. After Leo fell asleep, I sat at the small desk and organized all the evidence I had collected. The next morning I didn't go to work. Instead, I made an appointment with a child safety professional and a family law consultant. I showed them the photos of the industrial component, the messages from the secret group chat, and the documentation of Beatrice's behavior over the last year. I felt a surge of validation when I saw the look on the professional's face. They didn't tell me I was being dramatic. They didn't tell me I was overreacting. Their reaction confirmed my deepest fear. I wasn't imagining the danger. They told me that placing industrial components in a child's toy box was a form of reckless endangerment, and that the psychological manipulation in the group chat was deeply concerning. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing that I wasn't crazy. I was a mother doing her job. The consultant looked at me seriously and told me that I needed to take formal legal action to ensure this never happened again. They advised next steps I never thought I'd take in my entire life. Few hours later, Marcus called me. I finally picked up, but I kept my voice flat and professional. He sounded exhausted and angry. He demanded that I come home immediately and apologize to his mother to keep the peace. He said his mother was devastated, and that I had embarrassed him in front of his family. It was the same old song he had been singing for years, the idea that my feelings and our son's safety were less important than Beatrice's ego. I listened to him talk for a few minutes, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I didn't feel the need to argue or defend myself anymore. I calmly told him that peace was never the goal of a family. Protection was. I told him that he had failed as a father and a husband the moment he allowed his mother to put Leo at risk. He tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him. I told him that I wouldn't be coming home and that I was staying in a safe location with Leo. Then I dropped the final blow. I told him I'm considering a legal separation. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The next day the fallout began. I didn't talk to anyone in Marcus's family, but I didn't have to. I started getting texts from distant aunts and cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. It turned out that Beatrice was already on the phone, spinning a web of lies. My mother-in-law started a smear campaign, calling every relative who would listen and painting me as unstable and mentally ill. She told them I had kidnapped Leo in the middle of the night because I had a breakdown over a simple toy. She was trying to destroy my reputation before I could tell the truth. I watched the messages pour in, some of them accusing me of being cruel and others expressing concern for my mental health. It was a classic move from her playbook, discredit the victim so no one believes the story. But she forgot one very important thing. I wasn't the same woman she had bullied for years. I wasn't going to hide or stay quiet out of shame. I had something she didn't expect me to have. I had physical and digital proof. A family meeting was scheduled by Marcus's father, who wanted to mediate the situation. I agreed to the meeting, but I set the terms. It would be at a neutral location, a private room in a local library. When I walked in, the entire family was there. Marcus, Beatrice, her husband, and Marcus's sister. They all looked at me with varying degrees of judgment and anger. Beatrice looked like she had been crying, holding a tissue to her eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat down at the head of the table and opened my laptop. Without saying a word, I turned the screen toward them and began a slideshow. I laid out the photos of the toy box, the hidden items in the bedroom, and the screenshots of the group chat. I played the audio of the voicemail she had left me. The room went silent as the images of the dangerous battery and the mocking messages filled the space. I pointed to the specific message where Beatrice talked about toughening up Leo. I watched as Marcus's father leaned in, his face turning from anger to shock. He looked at his wife, then back at the screen. The evidence was undeniable. Finally, Marcus's father turned to Beatrice and asked her to explain the group chat. Beatrice tried to laugh it off at first. She claimed it was all just dark humor, and that I was too young to understand how people her age joked around. She said she was just trying to be a hands-on grandmother and that I was twisting her words. But as I flipped to more screenshots showing her detailed plans to bypass my rules, people started asking hard, pointed questions. Even Marcus's sister looked uncomfortable when she saw her own messages displayed for everyone to see. Beatrice's tone began to sharpen as she realized her excuses weren't working. The loving, misunderstood grandma facade finally slipped away, revealing the bitter, controlling woman underneath. She started snapping at people, telling them they were traitors for listening to me. She called me a snake who had been waiting for a chance to ruin her. I just sat there watching her unravel. It was the most honest she had ever been. She was angry that she had lost control, and she didn't care who she hurt in the process. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, my husband finally spoke. And he said exactly the wrong thing. Marcus cleared his throat and looked at the table. I thought for a second he might finally stand up for us. Instead, he looked at his father and said, "Look, Mom went a bit far, but she means well. Valerie is just blowing this out of proportion to get back at us." He defended her again, right in front of everyone, even after seeing the proof of her cruelty. He was more afraid of his mother's temper than he was of losing his wife and son. In that exact moment, I stopped hoping he would change. I realized that Marcus wasn't a man who had been tricked. He was a man who had chosen a side a long time ago. He would always choose the comfort of his mother's shadow over the responsibility of being a husband. I looked at him and felt a strange sense of relief. The decision was no longer difficult. The person I had married didn't exist anymore, or perhaps he never had. I closed my laptop and stood up. The room was buzzing with whispers, but I didn't care about their opinions anymore. I was done seeking their approval. I looked at the entire family and announced my final decision. I told them clearly that the family, as they knew it, was over. I told Marcus that I would be filing for a legal separation and that I would be seeking formal boundaries through the court system. I explained that from this day forward, there would be no more surprise visits, no more secret gifts, and absolutely no unsupervised access to Leo for Beatrice. I saw her face turn a bright, angry red. She wasn't used to being told no, and she certainly wasn't used to being told she was a danger to her grandson. I told the rest of the family that they could choose to be in Leo's life if they followed my rules, but Beatrice was officially barred. The room erupted in noise. Marcus tried to grab my arm, but I stepped away. He begged me not to do this to the family, but I told him he had already done it. My mother-in-law stood up, pointing a finger at me, and threatened to fight me with the best lawyers money can buy. She screamed that she would take Leo away from me because I was an unfit mother. Beatrice assumed I would back down like I had done so many times before. She thought her money and her status in the community would scare me into submission. She was very wrong. I had already spent the last 48 hours talking to experts and securing my own legal counsel. I didn't argue with her threats. I simply walked out of the room and drove straight to the police station. I filed a report regarding the industrial component she had placed in the toy box, providing them with all the photographic evidence and the group chat logs. I also submitted everything officially to the family court. I wasn't just complaining to my family anymore. I was involving the law. If she wanted a fight, I would give her a fair one, but it would be on my terms, with the truth as my weapon. 2 days later, a process server arrived at her house. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction knowing she was finally being held accountable. The authorities had opened an investigation, and she was officially contacted to provide a statement regarding the safety of a minor. Once the legal wheels started turning, Beatrice's panic truly set in. Her frantic calls turned from insults to begging. She left messages crying about how she didn't want to go to jail and how this was all a big misunderstanding. She even tried to send Marcus to the hotel to talk to me. He looked terrible, pale, thin, and desperate. He asked me to fix this and tell the police it was just a joke. He said his mother's reputation was being ruined and that his father was furious with her. I stood in the doorway of my hotel room and looked at the man I had once loved. I reminded him that I didn't break the family. He and his mother did. I told him that I wasn't the one who put a dangerous object in a child's toy box or mocked a mother behind her back. I was simply the one who stopped allowing it. I told him to leave and not to come back without a lawyer. As he walked away, I realized the truth was spreading far beyond the family. Friends and neighbors were starting to hear about the police investigation, and the wall of silence Beatrice had built was finally crumbling. The consequences arrived swiftly and with a finality that Beatrice never expected. Based on the evidence and the police report, a judge granted a temporary restraining order. She was formally restricted from any unsupervised contact with Leo until a full hearing could be held. Her reputation in our small town took a massive hit as the story of the toy box incident became local gossip. People who had defended her for years stopped calling. They saw the proof and realized they had been supporting a bully. Even Marcus's sister stopped talking to her, afraid that her own involvement in the group chat would lead to legal trouble. My husband was left in a house that felt empty and cold, caught between a mother who was losing her mind and a wife who had moved on. He finally realized exactly what he had lost, not because of my drama, but because of his own cowardice. He had traded his family for his mother's approval, and now he had neither. I felt no pity for him. I was too busy focusing on my son's future. A few weeks later, Marcus sent me a long email. It wasn't an email asking how Leo was doing or what he could do to help us. Instead, he apologized, not for what had happened to me or the danger to Leo, but for how the situation had affected him. He complained about his legal fees and how his friends were looking at him differently. He said he was sorry things got so messy, which was the most insincere apology I had ever received. That email told me everything I needed to know. He still didn't see Leo or me as real people with feelings. He saw us as accessories to his life. I didn't even bother to reply. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and added it to the file. I was done being his emotional support system. I spent the afternoon looking at new apartments in a different school district. I finalized my next move, ensuring that we would be as far away from that toxic environment as possible. I was reclaiming my life one step at a time. I found a small, bright apartment with a big balcony and plenty of room for Leo's building blocks. We moved in on a Saturday, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. I rebuilt our routines, making sure Leo felt safe and secure in his new home. I watched him closely over the next few weeks, and I saw a miracle happen. My son began to relax. His shoulders dropped, his appetite returned, and he started laughing again without that sudden, fearful freeze. He was playing freely, knowing that no one was going to test him or hide dangerous things in his toys. He didn't ask about his grandmother or his father very often. He was happy just being a kid. I realized that my instincts had been right all along. Children can sense tension and betrayal just as much as adults can. By removing the toxic people from our lives, I had given him his childhood back. However, I knew that I couldn't just hide forever. One final confrontation remained before I could truly close this chapter of our lives. I agreed to meet Beatrice one last time, with my lawyer present, to finalize the permanent boundaries. She looked older, her face lined with a bitterness that no amount of expensive cream could hide. She tried to use her old tricks, bringing up family history and how much she had sacrificed for Marcus and Leo. She tried to make me feel guilty for breaking her heart. I sat across from her and remained completely calm. I didn't argue with her version of history. I simply told her exactly why she no longer had access to my son. I used clear, firm language. I told her that her actions were dangerous, and that her lack of remorse was the reason this decision was permanent. I told her that I would never trust her again, and that no amount of money or family pressure would change my mind. She tried to cry, but the tears didn't move me. I saw the power drain out of her as she realized her words no longer had any effect on me. I was no longer the nervous mother she could manipulate. I didn't argue or explain myself further. I simply handed her the final legal papers and stood up. For the first time in our relationship, she had absolutely no power over me. I wasn't afraid of her temper, her money, or her influence. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I ever thought possible. I had learned that you don't have to win an argument to win a battle. You just have to stop participating in the fight. I drove home, thinking about how close I had come to ignoring my instincts. I had spent years telling myself that I was being too sensitive, just like they said. If I hadn't listened to that voice in my head the day Leo froze, what would have happened next? The thought was terrifying, but it served as a reminder to always trust myself. I wasn't just a mother protecting her child. I was a woman who had finally learned to protect herself. I was done being a shadow in someone else's house. I was the sun in my own. Months later, I was sitting on the floor of our new living room, watching Leo build a massive tower of blocks. He was singing that same little tune, but this time it was loud and happy. He reached into his new toy box, pulled out a bright blue car, and zoomed it across the floor. There was no hesitation. There was no fear. The dangerous box was gone, and so were the people who thought they could override my authority as a parent. My life was smaller now, but it was peaceful and real. I had lost a husband and a family, but I had gained my self-respect and my son's safety. I didn't just protect my child. I proved to myself that I could stand alone and win. The underdog had won by choosing clarity, boundaries, and strength over a false sense of peace. As I watched Leo play, I knew that the consequences Beatrice and Marcus faced were their own making. We were moving forward into a future that was bright, safe, and entirely our own. The box was gone, and finally we were free. Would you have done the same to protect your child?